30 years ago, America was the leader in quantity and quality of high school diplomas. Today, our nation is ranked 36th in the world.
There is no doubt that education is important, but current public schooling is not fulfilling its obligation to students. With a failing standardized testing system, underpaid teachers due to massive budget cuts, and unfair factors of socioeconomics, students' education suffers.
So much focus is on the test that not only is it taking away the love of teaching and learning, but we find our students, we've talked with medical professionals, and we find our students are exhibiting signs of stress because they know that the tests are having such high consequences on whether they're going to fourth grade or whether they're graduating.
I've never been a fan of multiple choice tests. I think they only show what students can pick out or what they can, it can remind them of, oh, I've seen that before, or that looks familiar, and so they choose that over some of the other options. Teachers use them obviously because they're convenient. It takes less time to grade a multiple choice test or a standardized test. I think testing companies are making a lot of money off public schools and schools who are choosing to use standardized tests.
The fact of the matter is that America's Common Core and standardized testing just isn't working, and they show no definite results for students' futures.
Here's the problem. They really are never intended to be used as the only measure of how well is a school teaching.
Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, was a rebel in high school and dropped out of college. He said this about the Mac. The Macintosh turned out so well because the people working on it were musicians, artists, poets, and historians who also happened to be excellent computer scientists.
Even with the attempts to bring in creative and critical thinking, our schools are becoming a one-size-fits-all system. And the results are that our artists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and scientists are becoming successful not because of our school system, but despite it.
In 2001, studies published by the Brookings Institution found that 50 to 80% of year-over-year test score improvements were temporary and caused by fluctuations that had nothing to do with long-term changes in learning. Teachers spend so much time and effort on teaching students to a test, but unfortunately, in most areas, that doesn't reflect in their pay.
In the state of Oklahoma, our teachers currently rank 51st in the nation in teacher pay. And you might think, how's that possible? We only have 50 states. Well, and the District of Columbia.
I think it depends upon the state in which you live. There are some states where their legislatures prioritize education and their teachers are paid rather well. In Oklahoma, our legislators have not done that. They've not prioritized education, and they keep giving us budget cuts, and as a result, teacher salaries haven't risen. I have not had a raise in probably 8 years, maybe 10. And I think it's sad. It's a sad commentary for our country that we're not putting more emphasis on education, because without teachers, there would be no other professions.
Specifically in Oklahoma, budget cuts are higher than any other state. In February, state leaders announced that Oklahoma was facing a $1.3 billion shortfall, which amounts to nearly 20% of last year's budget.
Well, the budget cuts that Oklahoma has experienced in the last year, 2 years, have been incredibly challenging for schools. One of the immediate things that we have seen is really 90% of the money that is spent in school is spent on things that have to do with people, with trying to afford the many, many people that it takes to run a school.
The legislature and Governor Fallin provided a $41 million increase to the school funding budget in 2014, but it was not enough to keep up with inflation and rising enrollment. Now with overcrowding, approximately 14% of schools had enrollments that were 6 to 25% greater than the capacity of their permanent instructional buildings and space, and 8% had enrollments that exceeded their permanent capacity by more than 25%. This translates into about 20,400 schools at their capacity and 17,400 schools that are overcrowded. In 2012, the United States spent $11,700 per full-time equivalent student on elementary and secondary education, which was 31% higher than the OECD average of $9,000. 85% of all juveniles who come into contact with the juvenile court system are functionally illiterate. So are 60% of all prison inmates.
You can't help but wonder,
If public education had more funding and was able to better prepare students for a successful future, would a smaller number of students resort to a life of crime in their adulthood?
Today, it can be difficult for students coming from low-income households to succeed in school. The reason being our economic system. Struggles such as families living off minimum wage and parents juggling 2 small jobs can affect students negatively. And parents who speak little to no English sometimes have trouble preparing their students for obstacles that come along with school.
Teachers do all they can to help their students succeed. However, students from a poor family background often have a hard time succeeding in a rigorous school system.
You know, if you look at statistics, you can see that, yeah, demographically, you sometimes see differences in how prepared kids are when they come to school, based on things like socioeconomic background.
Yes, in some cases, students are disadvantaged, but I think ultimately it boils down to the priority that parents put on education. I know in some places throughout the world that because of the socioeconomic neighborhoods and things, the schools suffer.
My hope would be that our students in the United States would see that they're blessed to have the opportunity to come to school, to learn, and to make of their future anything really that they want it to be, regardless of whatever background or circumstances they came from.
Despite all the evidence of the American education system falling behind other countries, some still believe the system is not broken.
Overtesting, underpaid teachers, and budget cuts are some of the reasons the school system is failing. So what are you, as the future leaders of America, going to do to repair the education system in our country?
What if Common Core was non-existent?
What would happen if teachers weren't underpaid?
What if every school could have a 100% graduation rate?